and it breaks, we're not having this conversation. Well, of course we're not. I mean, how do we just take a play that was a disaster and reverse it? Yeah. If the play broke and it was good, you win the game probably, and we're having a different conversation. But it didn't. It didn't. So we're not having that conversation, Nick. We're having this conversation about how it went badly. So let's talk about what happened and not reimagine what could have happened. I don't want to reimagine what could have happened. I want to talk about what happened.
Welcome to a football show Monday edition brought to you by Sinkers Beverages. That is Paul Kuharsky, and I am Braden Gall. My favorite Paul Kuharsky is exasperated, frustrated with logic and reason. Paul Kuharsky, how are you, sir?
I'm well. That's one of my favorite things. Like, people want to excise certain things from the game. So to everybody that wants to excise, hey, if they didn't get the punt blocked, and if Will Levis doesn't give away 3 points with that fumble, they're in good shape. And I say, okay, well, let's do the game differently. Let's take away the 40-yard touchdown to Calvin Ridley, and let's take away, the other best play of the game. Let's look at it like that. If we're going to take away 2 random plays, let's take away the 2 best plays instead of taking away the 2 worst plays. And how's that work out?
Speaking of adding or taking away 2 plays, if my aunt had balls, she'd be my uncle, Paul. That's the old line that my boss used to teach me. Mitch Light, shout out to Mitch Light from Athlon Sports when I used to work for him, and of course now at The Athletic. That's what he used to always say when we would have conversations about football games. Like, well, but this guy was this close, and that team was this close, and what about this team? Look, we can have a smart conversation about coaching 2 major mistakes out of Will Levis's game, and that's what we're going to talk about. And Brian Callahan today at his press conference said as much, Paul. He said, look, if we can eliminate those 2 things, we liked what we saw on the whole from the quarterback. We'll get into that because ultimately this is all falling on him right now. That's not necessarily fair, but also a major part of the conversation. And I think there's only one thing to do. So we'll get into that. We'll talk defense as well, what we saw at Nissan Stadium coming up on Sunday in week number 2. Deja vu all over again, PK. It was shockingly similar to the first loss. Stoney says, no hat for me. Paul has 1. No, I just got out of the shower. I worked out. I was doing yard work. I just got out of the shower. I am branding here. I'm branding. And also go to Sinkers Beverages, of course, and we will Nick Suss and I on Thursdays, 9 a.m. football show, we wear backwards hats and T-shirts. So that's what we
Unacceptable.
do.
And
Thursday.
That's why that's a lesser of the 2 products. And
wow.
It's disappointing. And look, if I've got you in a uniform here, that's fine. But wear a uniform. It's a uniform with a collar on it, and that's fine. So for this show, at least you've reformed. And I took some grief today because I was wearing a T-shirt on Robbie and Rexroad. Robbie and Rexroad is not a visual broadcast product. It's an audio broadcast product. And I wear a sweatshirt because it's freezing in there, and it warmed up, and I took off my sweatshirt, and I had a T-shirt on underneath. I had a 4:50 wake-up call. You know how morning radio works. And I didn't dress nicely for that. If we're considering that a visual medium now, I'll have to change. But I think if radio is not a visual medium.
What I heard is that you have more respect for me than Joe Rexroad. That's what I heard just now.
No, this is purely a visual medium.
Minus the podcast, of course. If you take out the podcast, Paul, what happens on the broadcast? So look.
As we're broadcasting live, we are looking at each other.
That's true.
In a digital way.
There's lots of stuff to get to, and a lot of it, again, centers around Will Levis. I have sort of a meandering theory I want to sort of for you to poke holes in and for us to sort of move around and really kind of explore the studio space. Joshua says, nothing wrong with the tee. I completely agree.
Not for you, Joshua, but for us. You're coming to look at us, and we should dress professionally.
I disagree. I will be going to Sinkers now to get some of their T-shirt swag so that I can brand wearing a T-shirt. The only reason I have a collar on is because this says Sinkers Beverages.
You're going to continue to wear a collar on this show. We both know it.
Sinkers Beverages, right there. Sinkers Beverages. Make sure you check out the 3-time liquor store of the year, because if you're watching the Tennessee Titans quarterback or special teams, you may need a drink. And of course, Sinkers Beverages has you covered. So search Uber Eats, have that booze delivered directly to your house. They drive so you can drink, and sign up for the in-crowd. That's their sort of rewards program there. If you like bourbon, I got to go to Southern Collective because I'm a part of the in-crowd. They invite their in-crowd members, the folks who shop there regularly.
Hip. East Nashville hip in
No,
crowd.
Southern Collective is actually downtown. But what happens is Sinkers does such a great job picking out their bourbon for you, the audience. They invited a bunch of their in-crowd members to come to the barrel pick to select the bourbon that they want to distribute. And instead of just going themselves and tasting a bunch of cool stuff by themselves, which they have the right to do, they invited a bunch of their customers. Because guess who's buying their shit?
That is cool.
Their customers. So it's amazing what you do when you just do stuff for your customers first out of hand. They're Bluegrass Beverages, of course, in Hendersonville as well. All Sinkers and Bluegrass proud sponsors of a football show, as well as Hot Read Podcast, Music City Audible, and that clip you just saw from the Paul Kuharsky podcast on Sundays and Thursdays. So make sure you're consuming all of our great content. If you're on YouTube, turn on notifications, thumbs up. If you want to jump into the comments and chat with Stoney, by all means. And please go check out his show with JT, Hot Read, on Thursdays and Fridays at 4 o'clock. Sinkers Beverages. I think that's everything from a housekeeping standpoint. All right. I don't know what there is actually that needs to be said about the Will Levis decision, the boneheaded brain meltdown moment where he blacks out and he does something insanely stupid. He's either going to solve that problem or he's not. And that's going to dictate whether or not, like, the first step in the choose your own adventure, PK. Like, if he fixes that, then he's got a chance to be a starting quarterback, and then we can discuss all the other things he has to do to be good. If he doesn't fix that, he's not going to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. That, to me, it's not really that complicated. And
Well, I'll say this about that. And I like what he said about rewiring his brain and everything, but it needs to become a non-consideration, not, I'm thinking about doing this, don't do that. It needs to not come into his head, the idea of doing that, because he's wasting a lot of processing time if he considers making that play and then says, no, that's a bad idea. That can't be the process. The process has to be that it's not in the realm of possibility to do those things. I suggested this morning, don't give him anything. Don't call a shovel pass. Don't have him throw anything that is not a overhanded football throw until this is out of his system. There's no reason to encourage anything that is a flick or a shovel or anything that is unnatural football throwing motion.
Even the option I didn't like. They ran a little.
I'm with you on that.
They ran a little option that looked awkward, and that's a running play. And you're right. Like, no,
it reinforces the urgency, the temptation to flick. Get rid of all of that.
Yeah.
But the brain rewiring takes a long time. So to think that this is going to be turned off in a week scares me. And I wrote this last week. His reluctance to change his running style over what's now a reasonable amount of time scares me in terms of what his reluctance or inability to change this stuff might be. And Callahan wanted to credit him for sliding. He went down more safely in this game, but he's still not going down in a baseball slide.
Still wasn't
begging for trouble.
It still wasn't great either. He took some shots on his shoulder. Actually, Ed says, "You don't give your kid matches to play with." Look, again. I don't want to belabor the mistake because I don't feel it needs to be belabored from a fan and media conversation standpoint.
And by 3 o'clock on Monday, it's been plenty covered.
It's so blatantly, obviously simple to analyze. We don't need to spend time on, like, you either fix that, which I think he can do. I think it will happen. And I think you can, that's a thing that should be easy to coach out of your game. And then we can get to the other stuff.
That last week.
I agree. And that's it. 2 strikes, you're done with this. You don't get many more of those, if any at all. Maybe a couple years from now, if he's established, whatever. But like eventually, very quickly, that's going to be coached out of you. And if it's not, you're not a quarterback in the NFL. And I want to get to some stuff here about, like, because I know you dealt with a lot of folks either calling for Mason Rudolph on your show, or it seems like the other end of the spectrum is the apologist for Will Levis. And I don't necessarily disagree with either side's line of thinking, but I don't think either of them are grounded in sort of reality as it pertains to the decision-making that Brian Callahan and the Titans have. If you want to say, like, hey, the offensive line wasn't great, special teams made mistakes, Will Levis this, Will Levis that, I don't think it's apologizing for Will Levis to say that he needs to stay in the lineup and that's their only option, that the Titans need to play the young starting quarterback. I don't agree with what the Panthers are doing with Bryce Young. I don't think that's the right thing to do. I don't think it benefits or gain I don't think you gain anything from benching Bryce Young. I don't think you gain anything from benching Will Levis. So I don't think it's an option. On the other side of the spectrum, like the folks who are calling for Mason Rudolph, I think it's okay to be frustrated with his decision making, frustrated with his play, be pissed off about it. But Mason Rudolph doesn't make any of the plays that Will Levis made yesterday with his legs, doesn't make any of the throws he made to Calvin Ridley. He doesn't make any of those things. So that's a ridiculous idea as well. I think the truth is just they are stuck with Will Levis for now. And if he fixes the egregious errors, Brian Callahan said today I like a lot of footwork accuracy. He settled in. He was on time. There was week-to-week improvement. Those are the things you are looking for from the quarterback inside of the offense. If you take away, I get it, it happened. If you take away the two egregious mistakes, you can point to some progress. And I think that's where fans need to sort of focus on the next 10 games or so.
Well, on the Bryce Young front, is this the verdict on Bryce Young? If it's the verdict on Bryce Young, which is very quick from Dave Canales and the new staff, then it's fine to pull. I mean, it was ridiculous. I know all you college football guys loved him for some reason. He's 4'3". It's ridiculous to draft him first overall. I don't care what he did in college. It's a bad pick. He's not an NFL player. So if you're deciding that now that quickly, I'm fine with it. If you're thinking, he needs some time on the side and he's going to come back, I don't know. You can't make that verdict on Will Levis at this time. And look, I've articulated this already. I'll make it short. Mason Rudolph, maybe as a game manager, could have won you one or both of these games. But, last year, fans were desperate to lose games because they wanted a higher draft pick. And now you're desperate to win games with a middling quarterback who ultimately isn't going to get you where you want to go, to a Super Bowl. And so, and you won't be in position to replace Will Levis if he's not the guy with the high draft pick that you so desperately wanted last year. So which is it? Play the young guy, get the fate that he gets you. Either let him get beat up, suffer all these consequences, fight through it, and see what you've ultimately got, or take the bruises that come with him not being good enough and suffer the consequences and get the draft pick that comes with it. But to play Mason Rudolph to get to 7 wins or whatever he could get you, get another middling draft pick, or have this prayer of getting into what you didn't want last year, which was the number 7 wild card, the number 7 seed and a wild card game where you probably get your ass kicked, or maybe you pull off an upset, but you get a middling draft pick and you've got no chance to make a Super Bowl run. This is what I think they should do all the time, is go for the playoffs, do whatever. I understand what they're doing this year, and I back what they're doing this year.
Yeah.
I generally want you to win at all costs, but I understand what they're doing this year. And last year, everybody wanted the opposite of what they now want. They want a middling quarterback in the game to get them to 7 wins, which last year everybody thought was an abhorrent idea.
Yeah, it was Ryan Tannehill. No, I completely agree. And again, to kind of reiterate this, if you are super frustrated with the decisions that Will Levis has made, you're not wrong to want him to be better. And if you think Will Levis is still the answer at quarterback, you're not wrong to want the Titans to be patient. Those are both accurate and true things that you can feel as a fan base. And I want to get to the adversity thing, because I think this is the case for all quarterbacks at the highest level in the NFL and in college football. This conversation about adversity, confidence, you don't want to ruin a young player's confidence. We talk about this at quarterback in the NFL. If you cannot handle a little adversity in your life as a starting quarterback, in particular in the NFL, then you are not QB1. That's it. That's the end of this discussion.
More than a little. They got to handle a lot.
Yes. If you can't fix mistakes, if you can't learn from your mistakes, if you can't study and make yourself better and progress through adversity and come out the other side a smarter, better, more efficient player, that's what makes you QB1. That's what makes you a starting player in the NFL. And so we talk about this in college all the time, where it's like, oh, you don't want to throw a young guy out there to get beaten up and then he loses all his confidence. I'm like, well, then you're not a starting quarterback. Like, then you're not the guy, and that's okay, but that's the reality. And so to me with Levis, and all of the things, if you want Will Levis to realize his potential, it's all still there. Because if you do take away the decision, which is, I assume, the top goal of Brian Callahan and Will Levis moving forward is to remove that one thing, which again, to me, is step one. This is table stakes for playing quarterback. If you do then look at what happened in week 2, he was better in the pocket. He did have better footwork. He was more on time. He was more accurate. We can get to all the other issues because there are some, but he did show progress. And even if it was small and it was overshadowed by the terrible mistake, there was progress. So if you're telling me that there could be incremental progress over the next 15 games, we can still debate what ultimately Will Levis's upside is. But at the end of the day, that is the only path forward for the franchise. You have to know definitively what he is moving forward. And this is an investment season in your franchise. You're investing in Brian Callahan. You're investing in the scheme. You're investing in Denard Wilson. You're investing for a long-term payoff.
And this stuff about him maintaining confidence is why he said he didn't lose sleep, because I didn't lose sleep because I've gotten better at not wallowing in my bad decisions and spending days or weeks lamenting what I did and tossing and turning over it. And I'm trying to learn how to rewire my brain on some of these instincts I have that I know are counter to my success. Look, I hate that he's got that in him, but I respect and admire the fact that he realizes he's got it in him and he's got to beat it out of himself in some way, shape, or form, that he realizes there's some psychology there. I wrote that I think he's got Superman complex where he's compelled to try to do too much. And look, it's a bad thing for the football team. It's a bad thing for his football career right now. It's not a bad attribute to have, to want to try to do a little extra, right? And if he's going to be a successful NFL quarterback, all of these successful NFL quarterbacks at a certain point do try to do too much. And most of them are successful at doing too much, doing a little extra. Now, I'm not saying he's going to wind up on that, even an inch towards the Mahomes end of the spectrum where you try to do too much and you, in fact, hit on it. But having a little bit of that in you, a little bit, that qualifies as having a little bit of dog, right?
Yeah.
Now he's got to figure out how, he's not as good as he thinks he is, at least now, and how to temper that and all of that. But it's not the end of the world. I mean, these 2 losses feel like the end of the world. And if he keeps this stuff up, obviously, like you said, it's going to be the end of him. But maybe there's potential we look back and say, hey, remember when he used to force stuff and how he's grown out of that?
So to your point about the confidence, that's one of the few things I think that I'm not worried about with him at all. I think his ability to believe in himself and to work hard to go out and execute, make himself better. Actually, I think that's one of his more charming traits, to be honest with you. And we talked about this with Nick on the Thursday show, where like this has been the thing he does every step of his career. Like, hey, I am going to be the starting quarterback in Kentucky, goes out and does it. I'm going to be a draft pick in the NFL, goes out and does it. I am going to be a starting quarterback in the NFL, goes out and does it. I don't actually think the confidence conversation is more for fans and for sort of the conversation out there. I'm actually not worried about that with Levis. And as you guys put on the website, paulkuharsky.com, you've got his first 11 games, kind of comparing him to other quarterbacks with similar numbers. And while it's not a great list to look at, I think there's some caveats and some context we should put in there. I still think we can have there's 2 conversations. There is, should he be playing now? Answer's yes. Do you need to learn more about him? Yes. Do you need to see him grow and develop and learn and progress? Yes. We can have a separate conversation about what you think his ultimate upside is. Like, I think his ultimate upside, if he figures all this stuff out, is like Matt Stafford. I don't think it's Patrick Mahomes. That is what it is. That's my opinion. You may think something different, Paul, but I think ultimately you can win with a quarterback of Matthew Stafford's caliber, and you can win with a guy like Will Levis if that's what he turns into. That's where I'm at with him. Is I still don't know if his upside is elite, but is Matt Stafford good enough for this franchise for 10 years? Probably.
Absolutely. It's hard right now to envision Matt Stafford, but that's not a terrible high upside comp. The other thing people need to lay off here, and I've gotten a lot of this in the last 24 hours, is, gotta get rid of that eye black and the bandanas and all of that. Look, the guy's allowed to have personality. And the minute things go wrong, you can't ask a guy to give up his personality. The eye black is not stopping him from having success. The eye black is not the thing that's forced him to make two really stupid mistakes. The bandana has nothing to do with what he's doing. You can't ask a guy to strip himself of all personality. And what you're effectively doing, if you think about what you're saying when you do that, is asking him to be bland.
Yeah.
And why does a quarterback have to be bland? Ryan Tannehill was a good guy, but he was pretty bland. And Jake Locker was incredibly bland. And Vince Young was bland. Why do we need that in a quarterback? And that's the same thing that's being asked of Brian Callahan when we get that thing today with the pearl clutching. Do you regret cursing at him when he came off the field? What are we, in the Southern Baptist Church? We're at a football game. Everybody's thinking that when he comes off the field. There's absolutely nothing wrong with him. And by asking him that question in the press conference today, it becomes a national story. Absolutely ridiculous. And I followed that up immediately by saying, what's wrong with you doing that, Brian? What's wrong with you being honest and emotional in the moment? And the answer is absolutely nothing. I don't want Brian Callahan to change the way he's behaving and being himself.
Agreed.
And being honest and being true. And everybody is asking questions that get him to back off of that are doing everybody a disservice. Brian, be like every other cliched coach speak coach. Will, take off your eye black and be bland. Why are those prerequisites for them to have success? The answer is they are not.
Yeah. Do we think that Will Levis needs to manage his emotions on the sideline a little bit better after mistakes? Maybe that is something he needs to work on.
I'm not studying him on the sideline because I'm watching the defense.
No, I know.
But what's he done on the sideline?
But my look, he's what I mean is he's an emotional player. And that ties that the reason he has personality is because of who he is.
And if he's a successful quarterback, that's probably going to benefit him.
Exactly. So the key is, like, are there times where a style of personality can help you? Sure. Are there times we have to manage it? Sure. That's called life. That's all of us. We all have to do that in every walk of our lives, no matter what type of personality or situation that we're in. So I agree that the idea that their success or failure is tied to their personalities is some of the dumbest shit I've ever heard. So I don't even have anything to add to that.
This Mike Vrabel, he stands on the sideline and his facial expression never changes. I can't believe it.
Mike Vrabel,
and now my Callahan is screaming at his quarterback. Oh my God! I mean, make up your mind.
Yeah, I agree.
Let people be people.
All you in the comments, I love you all. So I do have a question about Callahan, and I've got a question about other things that are going on with the team. But we'll get to that in just a second. Again, all of the quarterbacks, 31 different quarterbacks have started with some of the numbers that you have. And I think ultimately my Stafford comp is if everything breaks well, if everything breaks right, I think that's where he can end up at the end of it all. I'm not predicting that to happen necessarily. I'm just saying that's what I think his upside is. 11 starts, 10 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and 9 fumbles. Is that correct? Is that the numbers?
I think that's right. That sounds right off the top
So
of my head.
what did you learn going through the exercise and looking at the players that are sort of comparable to Levis's start to his career and what it might indicate for his future success or failure?
Well, it's not a particularly good list. All right. Brett Favre is unsurprisingly on there. So that is your initial hope, right? Brett Favre is on there, but also a bunch of big-time busts, some of the biggest busts in NFL quarterback history. Jamarcus Russell, Ryan Leaf, Tim Couch. How's that for a trio? Carson Wentz, who experienced the highest high and then crumbled. Mitch Trubisky, incredibly overdrafted guy, and David Carr, who was sacked to no end, is the standard for being sacked out of your career, pretty much. And then some guys that I thought, these guys don't sound too bad. And then I looked at their numbers. Vinny Testaverde, 21 seasons, 214 games. His teams were 90, 123, and 1. That's not what you want. Byron Leftwich, Kyle Orton, Brian Greasy, all not as good as we might have thought when you start to look at their numbers. two guys that I think wouldn't be bad if he turned out to be them. Alex Smith, who is a much better player results-wise than we remember.
Oh, yeah.
His teams went 99, 67, and 1 in the regular season. I always say it that way because I don't think wins are a quarterback stat, but I think what teams did with the guy at quarterback is noteworthy. He threw 199 touchdowns and 109 picks. That's a great ratio. And I think I wrote in here, somebody came back. I mean, if he was Alex Smith, that'd be a home run.
Yeah.
At this point.
And by the way, Alex Smith in those first 11 games, 3 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, 11 fumbles. So 22 turnovers, 3 touchdowns. Will Levis has 3 times as many touchdown passes. And here's the other couple of
and
notes.
One more name, Neil O'Donnell.
There you go.
Who took the Steelers to Super Bowl, had receivers run bad routes for him, and threw interceptions that he's still credited with to this day as a disaster. 120 career touchdowns to 68 interceptions, a tremendous ratio. Started for 8 years, got a big contract with the Jets. It didn't go well. Ended up here, backed up McNair for 5 years and had some very successful outings. Not a tremendous career, and you'd like Levis to be a longer starter. But if he had shades of Neil O'Donnell to him, I think you'd be happy. But this list is far, there's some really bad names on here.
It's way worse than good. There's no question. I think you're a little hard on Vinny Testaverde. I think Vinny Testaverde might be one of the better quarterbacks in Titans history. John Kitna and Rodney Peete are both on this list. I think two pretty good players.
Another one,
relatively speaking.
The Sanchez is on here, and he went to some championship games.
Neil O'Donnell, Byron Leftwich, Ryan Fitzpatrick actually had a pretty good career in the NFL. What's interesting, and again, none of these guys are reasons to celebrate Will Levis. What's interesting, PK, is looking at the list is a lot of very high first-round draft picks. That's what's really interesting about this list. And the other thing that I noticed about this is of the 32, I believe, that are on the list, only 8 of them had more touchdowns than interceptions at this point of their career. Will Levis does. And Will Levis has thrown more passes with fewer interceptions than anyone else on the list. 315 pass attempts, only 8 of them have more than 300 pass attempts. So if you start to dig through the numbers a little bit, it's not as bad. It's just not as bad as you think it might be. And so while the list is jarring and there's a lot of busts on there, there's enough on there that I don't think it tells me one way or the other whether or not Will Levis is going to be successful.
Were you, in fact, a big Tim Rosenbach guy? Tim, 2 M's? He's on here.
You're not. No, I'm not.
I don't remember him.
I'm not allowed to support you if you have 2 M's in your.
You're good at not liking bad first names while possessing one yourself.
I have a fantastic first name. Thank you. I don't want to give my parents credit for being ahead of the curve, but they
Stan
were.
Gelbaugh, Kyle Bowler.
Who's Andrew Walter?
Chad Hutchinson. It's real. You got to go look at this at paulkuharsky.com.
It's bad.
It's something to behold.
It's a bad list. But there's enough. I will say there's enough good on there, and Levis's numbers are better than most that are on there. Again, like Alex Smith, 3 touchdowns, 22 turnovers. That is an astonishing number there. Again, only 8 of these guys.
Number 1 pick, also. Yeah,
that's true. A lot of these guys. Rick Myers on here, top level pick. Either way, it's not a good list. Go read it, paulkuharsky.com. But I don't think it tells us one way or the other what Will Levis is going to be. I don't have much to add about the Levis conversation because I do think there was progress on the offense. They had, while the drives have not been good, and I posted this to the Twitter machine earlier today, they have 10 3-and-outs out of 23 drives, 5 turnovers. 14 of their drives are less than 10 yards. They've only started 1, Paul, in plus territory the entire year in the 2 games.
No turnovers and bad special teams. There
you go. 2 of them ended in block kicks, 6 scoring drives, only 1 in the second half. So, look, they need to be better. But they did have a 56-yard drive that almost got them in position to tie the game. They had a 71-yard drive in the second half. They had a 50, a 72, and a 68-yard drive. Clearly, there was progress from week 1 to week 2. Now, if you want to see what Brian Callahan is talking about when he used the phrase, and I might be mixing up the quotes here, Paul, so you can correct me. Is it be satisfied with the boring or be excited about the mundane? Something like that about what Callahan was talking about.
That's right. Whatever the paraphrase is, those are right there.
That was what Aaron Rodgers did.
Yes. That
is exactly what he did yesterday.
And then he found his 2 quote unquote big throws on the game-winning drive where he threw a perfect ball to over Snead, who was terrific all day, but he found his number one receiver over Snead. Mike Williams made one 19-yard catch all day. Cheeto was on him. We talked to Cheeto today. He said, I could have done more still.
Yep.
I think that's a pretty high standard for him. He was in great coverage, but Rodgers made his big plays really on that last series. And the Titans defense was tired at that point and didn't hold up at the end. So you can praise the Titans defense all you want. And they're the number one yardage defense in the league. Well, that's great. But yardage defense isn't what wins games. Points defense wins games. Third down defense wins games. And the red zone defense wins games. I think that last touchdown was 20 yards. So you got to be at the 19, I think, technically, to be in the red zone. So the Titans won the red zone on that drive, and they lost the game.
So to me, Rodgers, he didn't make any major mistakes at any point during the game. He took what the defense gave him for most of the game. He made some clutch throws when his team needed him to make throws, and delivered in the end and managed the game to a victory. That is sort of what I think Brian Callahan wants Will Levis to do. And
he didn't make the mistake Levis made.
Yeah.
He didn't throw the pick that Levis threw, which was really on Burks. And he threw an additional touchdown, which you could give that touchdown to Ridley because they got it on the end around. So they weren't that far off of each other in the end game.
Yeah.
If you break it down like that. Here's the other thing that should comfort people a little bit about Will Levis, if we want to go that way. Nobody's throwing for 200 yards in the league.
Yeah, it's weird.
There's a crazy thing going on. I think part of it's the approach to preseason, and teams are willing to kind of ease into the season. I think defenses are off to a big start. Something's going on. I hope it amps up because it's not been that great of football to watch. But you look around and everybody's throwing for 189, 175, 169.
Paul, the two quarterbacks next week at Nissan Stadium will not combine for 200 yards passing.
It's going to be brutal. Your family of Packers fans probably think that Malik Willis is a satisfactory quarterback, which disgusts me.
Some comments here. John Gall not coming into town for the Packers game. No relation. I would love some Alex Smith. Ed says he was texting with his new Jets friends in New Jersey during the game. Despite the boneheaded plays, they were all impressed with him, whatever that means.
I think that means that they were impressed that they could beat him.
I suppose this is really good, Jake. I appreciate this. If Levi's gets sponsored, if Levis gets sponsored by Levi's, he's one step closer to becoming Brett Favre.
And isn't the Super Bowl this year at Levi's Stadium? I mean, that would have been really something.
That's excellent. Javar says they don't have a good roster right now around Will Levis. And so there's a couple of things we can get to here because ultimately
that roster's a lot better than the one that was around him last year and around Ryan Tannehill.
No question. To me, to your point about going this direction to comfort Titans fans, if you take away the mistake, there was things you could say, all right, look, he got away from pressure, make things happen with his legs, made a couple of big plays down the field, got his team into a position to win. Like you can sort of start to see some of the progress. And I think
that 13-yard run was great.
We're just going to have to see.
Artist,
yeah,
right?
We're just going to have to see. So here's ultimately my question. Go to Sinkers Beverages, by the way, in East Nashville, 3-time liquor store of the year. Join the in-crowd. Follow them on the socials. You get all kinds of updates on allocations, on specialty bourbons and tequilas. They got a huge wine selection, a walk-in beer fridge that's fantastic. They got non-alc stuff, THC stuff. They got great stuff for all your Halloween and your Thanksgiving and your Christmas parties that are all coming up over the course of the next 3 months. They're your one-stop shop for all of those needs. So go check out Sinkers Beverages in East Nashville. So this, Ed, is exactly where I'm going to go with this. Can we critique the coaching staff? In-game adjustments on offense, and yesterday's defense didn't adjust when Rodgers went small ball. So here's my question, Paul, about Brian Callahan specifically. If you package in all of this, the special teams, Will Levis's boneheaded mistakes, the offensive line, if you package the whole entire games together into one big conversation, I think the scheme was pretty good yesterday. And I thought the scheme was solid in week one. I could point to the offensive line and the quarterback that didn't execute the scheme properly. Outside of the scheme, I think it's okay to say, what about managing the team? How have you graded Brian Callahan on that through the first two games?
I think he's done okay. I don't know. You can't come back from having a punt blocked and get a punt block. So that's not good managing of the team. Julius Chestnut didn't get the message. Julius Chestnut didn't look particularly impassioned about blocking his guy on that play. He was more concerned with getting upfield. What's that about? I mean, how can you be concerned with going to chase the punt returner before you know that the punt's getting off? That's just stupid. And this comes down to roster decision making. They liked the third runner better than they liked the third running back who was great at special teams. That bit you in the ass for 3 points there. Is that going to prove to be worth it? How many other mistakes is he going to make? So in terms of managing the team, that's a fail. In terms of getting through to Levis, we saw his explosive reaction. And he said again today how disappointed he was in that decision. So that's a fail. So that they repeated 2 big mistakes that they made in the first week, that's a game. That's a team management failure. Now, I think he had further to go maybe than he thought. He kind of hinted at that in week 1 and then talked about technique regression. But J.C. Latham, huge improvement from week 1 to week 2. I think Kuharsky probably also. The problems with the offensive line in week 2 were where they should be with the right side guys who are much bigger question marks. I think that they helped the tackles more in this game than they did in the first game. T'Vondre Sweat was a lot quieter in this game, drew more doubles, which freed Simmons. Simmons 5 tackles, but no noisy plays. I think your question, though, really needs more time for us to see, and we need to see failure and success before we have a handle. I think there are a lot of 0-2 teams with new coaches that would feel like they were starting to slip away from the coach. I don't feel any of that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And in part because I do feel like, again, the thing he is most comfortable doing is scheming and play calling. That's what he's got the most sort of experience doing in general. It's the other stuff that can be overwhelming for a first-time head coach that they have to learn. It's sort of having hands on 53, having hands on every player during all 4 quarters at all times. It's just a bigger job than what he's used to doing. And so I think that to your point, it's acquiring data. The signs are not great through 2 games, but way too early to make any just definitive judgments. But it is worth noting, eventually it falls on him to fix the mistakes and as a team. And maybe that does mean changing scheme at special teams or changing a coordinator at the end of the year or middle of the I don't know. But it's only 2 weeks, but I think it's worth saying. I think the scheme's pretty solid. The game management as a whole is still not there yet. That's all.
Rex Rhodes said this morning, collectively we've been desensitized to bad offensive line play. And I think that's true. We've got Nick over here in the comments saying Will looked pretty good this week. That's desensitized to mediocre at best quarterback play. I mean, was he slightly better than he was last week? Yes. Is he still uncomfortable and not making reads quickly and processing as quickly as he needs to? The ball to Burks. Burks should make a play on that. I don't understand how he loses it. But if he rolls out, he's got no pressure. Burks is open early. The ball is short and late.
Yep.
And then once he decides to throw it short and late, Ridley is way open underneath him and could have probably caught it and run as deep as Burks was where he caught it. So, Nick, I think you're desensitized to quarterback play. You can't say Will looked pretty good this week. Have you watched the league and seen pretty good quarterback play? You know who looked pretty good yesterday? Joe Burrow looked pretty good. That's pretty good quarterback play. You got to recalibrate, man.
Yeah. Talk about personality. I'm not sure what Joe Burrow's doing off the field, but that's a different subject for a different show altogether. I agree. Look, I think if you want to say he made major progress in a sort of a more holistic game in week 2 than week 1, I totally would agree with that. But is it good? Is it good enough? Not quite yet. I don't think we're close to that.
And to the guy in here, Javaris, who's saying, on this Malik Willis worship isn't going away, but he's saying Willis 1-0, Levis 0-2. Quarterback wins are not a stat. I mean, you could say the Packers are 1-0 with Willis playing quarterback. But you think Malik Willis won that game? He did a good job not losing that game.
Oh, no, there was not a second ever watching that game that I felt confident that if they needed a drive, he could do it. All right, Trevor says, what's up with Hopkins? Why is he even out there if they aren't going to get him involved? Look, he's a threat. He's somebody that forces other teams to game plan. And I guess he's caught a pass in every game he's been active in his career.
I think his knee is definitely an issue. But Callahan raised something interesting today that I hadn't thought about, and I don't know that anybody had thought about it. Levis is most familiar with Hopkins, right? He's new with Ridley. He's new with Boyd. He knows Burks and NWI, but they're secondary, even though Burks got far too many snaps at 30. You know who doesn't know Hopkins, who knows Hopkins the least? Callahan. Callahan had a full camp with Ridley. Callahan knows Boyd for 5 years. Callahan had a full camp with NWI. Callahan had a full camp with Burks. He didn't have a camp with Hopkins. So he said today, I'm still getting to know Hopkins. I've got to do better. I did call some stuff for him that didn't wind up going for him, but I've got to figure out how to get him better involved. There's good coaching candor. That's something I hadn't considered.
Yeah.
You know, because D-Hop is an institution kind of guy, and because he was so productive last year, and because he and Levis have such a connection and stuff. But that's something we haven't factored in. But I think D-Hop's knee is the biggest thing going on here, and I don't think it's going to get better. I think it's going to get worse.
First of all, I agree. I heard him say basically like, hey, I got to do a better job of getting him into the right spots or whatever. And to your point, I had not thought about that either. So it's, again, I appreciate Brian Callahan's honesty there, but hopefully look, they got the bye week fairly early, right? So they can kind of maybe hope that Hopkins is there with that. I don't know what to say about, I'm not a doctor. I don't know if his knee is going to eventually work out and he's fine, or if it's just something that he can't play through the entire rest of the season.
Doesn't look like himself, though.
Right? No, he doesn't. He doesn't. Now, red zone. Can you go out there and get him on a red zone option though? And when you're down by 7 in the final minutes, I still think he's valuable in why he's out there and why you're keeping him active and why you're not putting him on IR and all this other stuff. So I think there's value in having him out there from a preparation standpoint, comfort standpoint, forcing the defense to think about it standpoint. I think there's a lot of that stuff. I did want to point out one thing about before we get to the defense here, and I wanted to point this out about, and I think you kind of alluded to some of this on your show, but if you are going to start talking about the front office at any point during all of this, Ran Carthon and his team and what they've done, I think you have to make the list in this offseason of biggest acquisitions. And if you do that, you have Calvin Ridley with the big giant, I would say a fairly good sized check mark in his box for the first 2 weeks. Ernest Jones, giant check mark in his box.
It's great yesterday. And Gibbons is on the bench. Hallelujah.
Tony Pollard, I think you got to give him a check mark as a big acquisition so far. L'Jarius Sneed, I think outside of the one pass play in 2 games has been L'Jarius Sneed, big check mark there. Chidobe Awuzie, I think you got to give him a big check mark there. I don't think we know enough about Diggs and Adams yet. And
Adams played 2 snaps. I mean, Adams is nothing so far.
I don't know. I'm not sure yet on Cushenberry. I don't think that's a big check mark. But the point is, if you look at his 7 or 8 biggest, most important moves of the offseason to make the team better, some of them were incredibly shrewd. You got to step back and say Ridley, Jones, Awuzie, Sneed, Pollard, Cushenberry, check down the list. All very solid players through the first 2 games.
Yeah, the free agent,
Murray
too. All quite solid. Last year's draft class. I thought Skoronski was better. Help me remember, because I'm bad at ticking them off the top of my head, but they had bad opening day. Spears hurt. So we haven't seen full Spears yet, but we don't need him to see him because I think Pollard is beyond expectation so far. And I think we need to see more of Pollard. Stoney mentioned in the comments there, the solution to this double high safety and everybody playing to prevent deep stuff is to run more. And we know Tony Pollard didn't see a single stack box in week 1. So they need to feature both those guys more, but more Pollard. But I agree with you. I mean, the free agent class, and you expect somebody to underachieve out of that group. And so far, a lot of check marks, and the guys that don't get big check marks yet, aren't getting minuses. We just don't know yet. I mean, Adams is a gravy guy.
Yeah.
But two snaps.
So Stoney says Sebastian Joseph Day. There's another
he's been solid
player that's been pretty solid as well. So look, again, the last 2 draft classes, I think it takes time because you're going to go up and down, right? You're going to have Skronsky's going to be good for a few weeks and then take a step back, and then he's going to be good for a few. Like that's just sort of the nature of a couple of.
He needs to be consistently better, though.
He does. But I think the drafting, unfortunately, is going to be tied almost directly to Latham, Skronsky, Levis, and Sweat. Like those 4 are how you're going to evaluate Rand Carthon. But if you're evaluating him on the other side of the job, which is making the team better, when you see opportunity, which is L'Jarius Sneed and Ernest Jones, when you see opportunity to go make your team better for an affordable price, he has done that almost every step of the way. So big credit to Carthon.
Ernest Jones in particular. I mean, because we were anticipating Sneed, right? That happened a long time ago. For Ernest Jones to come in late as a solution at a spot that didn't feel like they were acknowledging was a problem with Gibbons, who can make some nice plays, but really is deficient, and then really blew that special teams play. You say, well, Gibbons shouldn't be a starter, should just be a special teamer, and then he blows a key special teams play. I mean, to me, Gibbons' arrow is down. He played 3 snaps, and those 3 snaps were when Murray was getting the concussion check. So thankful for them that he doesn't have a concussion, and they can go with those 2 inside linebackers. It's a very good pairing right now.
At times, I felt like I was taking crazy pills all summer and spring, thinking like this is not the answer at this position. Like it's just not, and it's not meant to be rude or disrespectful to the good doctor, but like he's just not a starting NFL player. That is what it is. So.
And meanwhile, Azeez Al-Shaair going crazy last night. I mean, he should have been thrown out of the game, and he's going to get some big fines for his actions over on the Bears bench.
Yeah, and smacking the quarterback a little bit late there. He got lucky, he didn't get flagged for it. So ultimately, the offensive line problems, I think, PK, are just something you have to just sort of suffer through. And I do think it's very different looking at the defense. I know we can poke holes in the defense. They gave up the touchdown on that final drive. The 2 veteran corners gave up those 2 plays. It's a Hall of Fame quarterback who just made plays. They do need to take the ball away more, but they have been good. And I think it's in large part because they're a bunch of veterans. The other side is just going to take time because it's not. It's Levis, it's Skronsky, it's Latham, it's MPF, it's Radens. There's just not a lot of veterans in the box for the Titans on offense right now, and they're just going to take time. Levis and the quarterback, you just don't have that much time. They need to make some progress here.
There are more holes, more weak links on offense. Depth problems on defense. You can't have anything happen to somebody like Harold Landry, who's playing, a yeoman's load over there. Arden Key, isn't doing a lot. He's playing a slew over there as well. So the defense can't afford to lose frontliners at certain spots. The depth in the particularly at corner is nice. But things are shaping up very nicely over there. Let's see Jeff Simmons get going. To me, that would be like the next piece for the defense, and that could be the thing that helps get the turnover thing going a little bit. And you hear the traditional stuff about how it's streaky and all of that, but they've not been opportunistic or creative at all in that department. And to be a really great defense, you've got to have that.
I do think of all the coaches, of the big name coaches, right? Let's say coordinators. I do think that Denard Wilson is the guy who's done the best job so far to date. I think that sort of is what it is. Lots of questions here, so let's get some of these questions in. Sinkers Beverages, by the way, search Uber Eats, have the booze delivered directly to your house. Search for Sinkers Beverages, have them deliver. Of course, over almost 40 years serving East Nashville, 3-time liquor store of the year. Great selections, great knowledgeable folks. They'll take care of you. Bluegrass Beverages up in Hendersonville. Make sure you check them out as well. Serving that market for over 50 years, locally owned and operated. Just support good local businesses. Javar says, would you trade for a right tackle, Paul? I don't think so.
This idea that trades are the solution. I mean, nobody's trading anybody right now. You're talking trade deadline time, and trade deadline time, you trade for somebody to make a playoff push, and this team doesn't look like it's going to be making a playoff push. So no.
Nick says, would you change some personnel on the punt team? Something has to be
To
done.
who? To who? I mean, they play back of the, you put a starter in there maybe to help you out. So you want, who? Instead of Chestnut, you want Pollard or Spears there? Or, a linebacker who's not on the punt protection team?
Yeah.
Sure. I'm all for getting the people out there that will let Stonehouse not suffer from PTSD and come to the sideline like saying the same thing that Callahan said to Levis after the bad play.
Brutal.
WTF.
Brutal. Austin says Titans look better than the Colts, though. That is true. They look bad. They look bad. I will say one thing I noticed about Anthony Richardson that I just, as a random observation, he is very accurate on the run. I really like how he throws the football on the run. Like he's running one direction and he puts the ball, he changes his arm slot. I think he's got a lot of growth to go, but there's some stuff that you really like about that. Jake says James Williams should be on punt. 100%. There you go.
Is he not?
I saw him on.
He's not?
I thought he was on coverage. I've seen him make some tackles on coverage, I thought. Let's see here. What else we got?
So punt returns. The reason these guys are leaving early is because Gibson is averaging, 11.7 yards and had a long of 19. So Mike Brown, also according to Blake Bedingfield, who wrote a game review at paulkuharsky.com, said that Mike Brown also seemed in a hurry. The personal protector, the last guy back, was in a hurry to get out on the Julius Chestnut punt. These guys are in a hurry because they want to prevent the big return. Well, first you have to make sure the punt gets off.
Yeah, James Williams inactive yesterday. He was on coverage in week one. It would be helpful though, going back to the draft class. Like if Cedric Gray or James Williams could be active on Sundays, that would be a helpful.
Well, Cedric Gray's got to get off IR first.
I agree. Austin also adds, no matter what happens, you keep Levis in there all year long, barring injury. I completely agree with that. Ed says, seems like releasing core special teams player this offseason has bit them in the ass. I think you've been on that theory for a
Hassan
while.
Haskins, Elijah Molden is another one. They traded him, actually got a 7th for him, but they could have done better in that department.
John asks, like, what about Nick Holes? What's he's been doing? And it is hard to know what to put on him in any way, shape, or form, right? Like, I don't know how you evaluate that because it's Brian's offense and play calling and scheme.
Yeah, I mean, he's the number one guy, right-hand man for Callahan. He's looking a little bit ahead, considering red zone stuff as they're approaching the red zone, so that Callahan says, what do you think looks good here? Stuff like that. He's kind of an anticipator in a lot of ways for stuff. But yeah, it's hard to pin down exactly what. Seems like a bright guy. Is a good conversationalist with us when we talk to him, and kind of different set of eyes and ears and opinion.
I just don't think if you're making a list of things that if things go wrong, here's who to blame for this. Like he's just down the list. Like he just doesn't carry the same responsibility as the other guys. Ranking third down plays and red zone plays and sort of getting game plans ready for Brian and Will to sort of finalize is sort of how that works. Stoney says, last regime, special teams too much value. This regime, special teams too little value. Is that fair through 2 games?
I don't think so. I don't think the last regime valued special teams enough. Craig Aukerman was like the Pope in that job until Amy Adams-Strunk stepped in, and it took Ryan Stonehouse almost dying for him to lose his job. They gave a lot of lip service to special teams, but and they also ignored kicker for the better part of 2.5 years and just figured things will get done. And now Mike Vrabel says, isn't it interesting that all these kickers that passed through Tennessee sucked when they were here and got good when they went elsewhere, never considered the fact that they were coached better elsewhere and they weren't coached well here. And then a lot of people say, well, they're not really coached to kick. Actually, they had James Wilhoit for a while on the staff in Tennessee and didn't have much of a bearing on him.
I know a bunch of you guys have been commenting. Obviously, Houston looks good, but the rest of the division is there for the taking. So
the rest of the division is there for the taking. So you could be second place in the AFC South in a non-playoff qualifier.
So look, I'm cynical and I can look at the season through the lens of the big picture and say, all right, better draft pick. Progress and learning and growth is more important than winning. But at the end of the day, you're a fan of a team and you want to enjoy your Sunday. And so a couple of extra wins over your division rival could be the reason that this team has growth and optimism in the final. Like, again, it's all in the back half of the season. And if they win a bunch of games because Will Levis has worked out the kinks and the offensive line's gotten better, and you start beating your division rivals, I think that is a great way for this season to end.
Oh, I agree in terms of, I mean, that's what Brian Callahan needs to do with this team is show growth quarter to quarter. First quarter's off to a bad start. You're still talking quarters, even though there's a 17th game there, but they need to make steady progress. And, so far there's no progress.
The number of teams in any level of football, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday nights, the level, the amount of teams that figure things out at some point during the season, young players grow and develop, inexperienced coaches grow and develop, and by the last 4 or 5 or 6 weeks are playing and doing really good things that then leads to better things the following year is very normal in football. Happens all the time, happens in high school, college, and pro football every year. And that is ultimately what you want from the team. If you start the season 2-5, fine. But if you finish it 5-3 and the quarterback has figured out some of these problems and the offensive line is showing progress, like that's what this is all about.
Well, fans of the Titans are going to have a hard time with that. They're not going to want to see Will Levis go 5-3 or 5-2 down the stretch and progress because they're going to say, well, they're bad now and they need a good draft pick. Fans here care much more. You wait all year for the 17 games, and then when there's 7 of them left, they don't care about the season anymore. They care about April, and all they want is a damn draft pick. It's the most frustrating and dumb thing in the world.
As Stoney says, I'll enjoy my Sundays win or lose when I'm loaded up after a trip to Sinkers Beverages. There you go. That's all you needed. Of course, you can catch Paul on the Paul Kuharsky podcast Sundays and Thursdays. PaulKuharsky.com is the website. Stoney on the Hot Read, of course, on Tuesdays and Fridays at 4 o'clock. Obviously, rate, review, and subscribe to this show. We do appreciate your support on Mondays. Obviously, go support Sinkers Beverages as well. Myself and Nick Suss from the Tennessean on Thursday mornings. So I'll be back.
No dress code. Don't respect you at all.
That's fine.
Be dressed like a couple of slobs.
But he's far more enjoyable to hang out with, PK. He's just, he doesn't have as many rules.
Just turn the cameras off.
I've been trying to get him to upgrade the camera.
They'll do it with black screens. You just listen to it. It's like Metallica's Black album or Smell the Glove.
All right. Smell the Glove. That's good stuff right there. Good reference. All right. I will be with 10 people at Nissan Stadium this weekend. Not in the press box.
Poor bastards.
Not in the press box. I got
willingly to see Levis versus Willis.
And you know how much I fucking spent on tickets? God damn it. It's so bad.
That's why he's a rich man.
So bad.
Sinkers is paying him a lot of money.
Oh no, I'm passing that cost on to my cousin, my brother, my dad. They're all buying their own tickets at this point.
You said prices. Cousin. I thought you were going to say customers.
No. My cousin and his wife and his son are coming in. My brother's in town. My dad and mom are going. I'm taking my 2 girls. So here's what I learned.
Godspeed to you all. Are you taking the bus? You're a big bus driver, bus rider.
If it was me, I would take the bus. Absolutely. But here's what I've learned, and this is just me. And because going to Lambeau Field is so incredibly difficult, it's just not an easy thing to do for an average football fan. I have learned a long time ago, Paul, that it is not about the score. It's never been about the score. It's not. I know this sounds super cheesy, but when it comes to taking my daughter she gets to go to like one Packers game every 8 years, it's about just being there and having fun. And if we get a combined
stadium experience,
if we get a combined 200 yards of passing offense, I will be ecstatic. And if we get to, 20 points on both sides of the equation, I'll be ecstatic. But at the end of the day, it's about consuming adult beverages from Sinkers, spending time with my loved ones, and forgetting about the final score.
Are you sneaking Sinkers beverages into Nissan Stadium? Is that what I'm hearing?
No. Absolutely
the big tailgate in the big parking lot?
Tailgate. Yeah. Sinkers. No, we've got a secret tailgate, and we're not going to tell anybody where because I don't want anyone to learn how I get to Nissan Stadium.
Good luck. Godspeed to all of you idiots going to that game. Don't block the box, but be sure to lock the locks.
Yeah. All right. For Paul Kuharsky, I am Braden Gall. Thank you, of course, to Sinkers Beverages as well. Everybody out there for listening. Rate, review, subscribe, thumbs up, etc. We will talk to you guys coming up on Thursday.
See ya.